Welcome everyone. Good morning. I'm very thankful to each and every one of you who have trusted and supported us in our initiative to contribute to build capacity and to initiate a discussion on this legislation that affects all participants in the industry, from GenCos and IPPs to DISCOMs to end consumer clients. I would like to convey my regards and appreciation for our esteemed speakers who have honored us with their presence in our journey. We have received tremendous and humbling response from audiences across the globe and the sector. It makes us feel contented that we were able to initiate and drive discussions on the proposed Amendment Act forward. Today's webinar is the last part of this three-part series. To remind you, the first session was on building institutional strength in the industry through the legal and regulatory framework. The second part was to deliberate on the market side, market development through demand and supply. And today, in this concluding part, we are going to discuss market facilitation through tariff mechanism, where we will deliberate upon tariff rationalization, consumer interests, and energy storage. So, moving on to the speaker's introduction, we feel ourselves truly blessed to have patronage of many key veterans of the Indian electricity industry. These are people who have written golden pages in the history of evolution of industry and contributed in so many capacities. Bear with us, these are long introductions. But our feedback from earlier webinars has been that the audience really appreciated getting to know the speakers before hearing from them. Today, we are privileged to have with us Dr. Pramod Dev sir, a person whose name itself is self-sufficient to understand that if he is speaking on any topic, it will be full of wisdom and experience. Dr. Dev holds a postgraduate degree in physics, a doctoral degree in infrastructure economics, and has done postdoctoral research in energy policy and economics. He has co-authored 3 books on energy planning, energy management, and regulatory practice. He has more than 30 years of experience in the Indian Administrative Service, IAS, of which more than 20 years of experience has been at both policy and project management levels in the energy sector. Mr. Dev has worked in the power sector in the Ministry of Power, Government of India, Department of Energy, Government of Maharashtra, and international institutions like UNEP and AIT. He is the longest serving person in Regulatory Commission, started as member with MERC, moved into the chairman's role, and thereafter moved to CERC. This must be known to many, but he's a huge proponent of renewable energy. Under his leadership, first time ever, the first ever tariff order on wind energy procurement was passed in the state. He is the one who proposed issuing model tariff regulations for RE while he was in CERC. He is the one under whose leadership we saw CERC REC regulations also establishing the REC market. Dr. Dev is the founding director of state and national level energy institutions, namely Maharashtra Energy Development Agency and the Energy Management Center, now upgraded to the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Dr. Dev is a recipient of the World Wind Energy Award 2005 from the World Wind Energy Association for his outstanding achievements in the dissemination of wind energy. So we are blessed to have your presence for this session. Next, we have Mr. D. Radhakrishna, Honorable Chairman, Tripura Electric Regulatory Commission. He's a graduate in electrical engineering from Government Engineering College, Jabalpur, and thereafter joined MP State Electricity Board. He's an MBA and also an LLB. After NPSCB, he joined private organizations and worked at Ahmedabad, Mumbai, Hyderabad, and Kolkata before joining in his commission. After sharing his credentials and deep understanding and decades of work on the sector issues from both public and private perspective, do we need to discuss the profile further? We are very thankful to you, sir, for agreeing to join this webinar. Coming now to Mr. Ashok Pense. He's a noted and perhaps among the few people who has always stood up for the consumer rights in most of the regulatory commissions. He has been a dominant voice for consumer perspective in MERC. He is an alumnus of IIT Mumbai Mechanical Engineering 1972 batch. He was CEO of a company manufacturing electrical equipment, exporting to almost 12 countries with about 250 people. He has been a consumer representative at MERC starting from inception in 1999. He has trained consumers in 5 other states, and he has argued for almost about 1,100 cases in MERC and also participated in around 30 to 35 cases in APTEL and 6 cases in Supreme Court. Thank you, sir, for your long years of service in the Indian power consumer. Our next signatory speaker is Dr. Rahul Valvalkar, a graduate in electrical engineering and MS in energy management from New York Institute of Technology, and then Wharton School of Business and a PhD from Carnegie Mellon University in engineering and public policy. He was member of the task force at CEA on RE renewable energy grid integration. He is the member of several international bodies on energy storage. For example, the Energy Storage Association. He was a member of expert committee on energy storage, and he is president and MD of Customized Energy Solutions, chairperson of Global Energy Storage Alliance, and also the president of India Energy Storage Alliance. A large part of audience must surely be familiar with Rahul's tireless campaign to take storage forward and upgrade the Indian grid for the future. Thank you, Rahul, for joining this webinar. I'm sure if we Sunsource founders are an example of reverse brain drain in solar energy, you are an example of the same thing in energy storage. From that perspective, we all chose to put the nation above other things. We have Mr. Abhishek Tripathi next, founder and managing partner of Sarthak Advocates. He's a graduate from the noted National Law School, Bangalore. He worked with Luthra and Luthra Law Office prior to founding his own firm. Abhishek advises clients on a wide range of sectoral laws such as energy and power, insolvency, real estate, Companies Act, foreign exchange, securities, insurance, and telecom. His experience in power sectors spans various jurisdictions beyond India as well. He has advised on power projects in Nepal, Senegal, Bhutan, Sao Tome, Maldives, and Myanmar, besides India. Abhishek has been recognized as the 40 under 40 lawyer in Asia by Asian Legal Business 2020 survey. He's someone with a deep understanding of law in the power sector. But if you think someone with this depth would hardly care to explore other aspects of life, then let us tell you, there is a sensitivity of an adept artist behind this black cloak. He carries a deep interest in writing poetry. His creations are surely creations that can jolt many from within. Some that we can recall are Gandhi or Rawat, Siski, Mazdoor Ma. Thanks, Abhishek, for joining this webinar. So moving on to the next phase, to the questionnaire session, laying out the protocol quickly. So in the protocol that we follow, it's a very simple one. We present a few questions to each of our speakers. We have allocated 7 to 8 minutes to each speaker, which can be extended by another 2-3 minutes to sum up. In the end, we follow this by a question and answer session from the audiences, as well as some of our own questions. We don't provide concluding remarks, as our speakers' answers and question and answer responses should suffice. So the first set of questions is to Dr. Pramod Dev, sir. Sir, you were chairman of MERC and also CERC. Both positions helped you gain in-depth perspective over and above what you already had brought in. MERC was more of a state level and consumer and state political perspective, while CERC more of a central institution perspective. First question is, which do you feel as regulator was more challenging and why? Then you have also been a regulator as well as a regulator of regulators with FOR. In terms of challenges faced by regulators in different states, which do you think was the most contentious or highlighted issue in your opinion as you saw it? You know, there are so many: open access, consumer tariffs, renewables, or financial instability of discoms, or was it something else altogether? So that's the second question. And finally, on the proposed amendments, with respect to the distribution sub-licensee part, and will the end franchisee and the sub-licensee part will it make life better or easier for consumers in terms of tariffs and their visibility? Does this reform take us to the next logical point if you were expecting after Electricity Act 2003? With that, over to you, Dr. Dev, sir. Sir, we can't hear you actually. If you can unmute yourself. You will have to unmute yourself, sir. Dr. Dev, can you please unmute yourself?
Okay.
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Well, thank you. No doubt, as chairman CRC, it was very easy job. Chairman MERC was very tough. The reason is electricity is a political economy issue. And when it comes to the tariff, CRC is far removed. Because CRC determines the tariff of only interstate entities like NTPC, Power Grid, or new IPPs which are come. So obviously, problem comes is that every cabinet meeting, once we had a shortage of 30% in Maharashtra, every cabinet meeting used to start with what MERC has done about the load shedding. Because we were foolish enough to address this issue. Because since Maharashtra was facing this shortage, what we decided to do, follow a protocol, one for urban area and one for rural area, where depending upon your losses, AT&C losses, you will be supplied electricity in that proportion. So if you had high losses, then you would be getting less electricity. So that had created so much political awareness that I used to get phone calls from even the distant rural areas, because politicians there used to go to the substation and they used to watch that what was the protocol because they were categorization like A, B, C, D. So that's how the things go. And every cabinet meeting weekly used to start with invoking MERC and what MERC has done. Whereas CRC, it was such a distant position that when we tried to have consumer representatives for our tariff hearing or any matter, except for when it came to the renewable energy, we hardly got any consumer representative attending those hearings. So this is the difference. Although whatever CRC does finally affect the state consumer, but it is not direct. Also, Maharashtra, we are very lucky to have very active consumer organization. Dr. Ashok Pense is here. He was one of them. So those are the positions. So I think that is in brief what I would say. Now, coming to the second issue about tariff rationalization, as we are the focus of it. In fact, the problem has not been has not been addressed at all. Because one of the important things of the Electricity Act 2003 was to abolish the monopoly of state electricity board and bring in non-discriminatory open access. So what has happened is that in principle, states have created generation, transmission, distribution companies, but they have also created a trading company which buys the electricity and which supplies in proportion to the DISCOM's consumer mix, so that the political goal that the tariff is common for consumers. So if you belong to a one particular consumer category, tariff remains the same. So if you take Gujarat, what GUVNL does for the consumers in Kutch, where they don't have a favorable consumer mix, they are given cheaper power and more expensive power goes to the industrial area. So that has defeated the purpose. And second is the issue of how to deal with agriculture subsidy. This is the most important one. So like if you take Gujarat, Gujarat has 18 lakh agriculturists and tariff which has been fixed by the Gujarat Regulatory Commission is 3 rupee 42 paisa as against the 5 rupee 89 paisa is the average cost of supply. So what happens is that government gives 11 billion, that is 1 lakh 11 subsidy. And now if you take Maharashtra, Maharashtra is even worse, where it is 3.71 as against 7.31, and government gives a subsidy of 5,000 crore. Now this 5,000 crore subsidy is given upfront in both the cases. The reason is both the states have a very large number of industrial consumers who contribute more than 50%. So they have a sufficient electricity duty collected through them. So there is no difficulty. So in the context of the new act, when we talk about the DBT, direct benefit transfer, even if the money is directly given to the DISCOM's account, not to the agriculture, the difficulty comes in Maharashtra for last 7 years, as against the gross billing of 4,800 crores, collection has been something like 380 to 430 crores. So that means even if the DBT is paid, this money will not be available to DISCOM, which will affect the DISCOM's health. Similar will be the case in Gujarat also. So DBT is thought as a panacea, but one has to look into this issue, rationalization. Other is that you are talking about reducing the cross subsidy. Now, if you want to reduce the cross subsidy, how are you going to do that? Because you will have to, state government from its own budget will have to give, say like in Maharashtra, instead of 5,000 crores, they will have to give something like 15,000 crores. So if you want to reduce the industrial tariff. Then another area is of real concern is agricultural losses. When we talk about the agriculture losses. Again, this time the MERC has done very good job. Prayas had taken initiative. Discom had claimed that their losses were only 16%. But based on the study of the agriculture feeders and the agriculture consumption has been exaggerated. So now the MERC has decided that the losses are 20.7%. So this is the shortfall. Now this is an issue. How are you going to do? Because once we had agriculture feeders, it was expected that you will be able to have a right measure of losses. So these are the issues which we had to address. These are the issues of political economy, and unless you address those issues, we are not going to move to the goal of tariff rationalization. Because tariff rationalization will be possible only if the government, state government gives from its own budget, or the central government has to give that money, or there has to be a political consensus how to do that. So I think I'll stop here because I think this is a broad picture which tells you what ails this power sector. Lastly, as far as the franchisee and the secondary, you are talking about the distribution, sub-distribution company. Again, the issue will come in the sub-distribution company. There is no clear definition what it is. Assuming that sub-distribution company will be allowed to make capital investment. If that capital investment is made, then that equity must earn some return. In that case, how are you going to keep the tariff safe? Because again, as I say, no chief minister will accept that the area which has been carved out for a sub-distribution licensee, the tariff is higher or different. So that being the case, you face a straightaway problem. At least in franchisee case, if franchisee doesn't have to go to the regulator for tariff, it's only to get the inform the district. So what is expected is that there will be no capital investment made. So that is the distinction I'm making. So I think I will stop with this, and thank you for giving me this opening spot.
Sir, wanted to check with you if on the second question, which of these issues do you find most contentious among open access, consumer tariffs, or renewables in your tenures?
No, see, renewables is also going to be a very problematic one because you don't have resources distributed equally. If you were to take Rajasthan, Rajasthan itself will have a 200 gigawatt of capacity. So you cannot be asking just because you have a renewable resources, you should bear the burden. And if you try to fix uniform RPO, renewable purchase obligation, again you run into difficulties. The states which don't have resources, if they had to get this electricity from other resource-rich states, then there is a cost involved of wheeling, transmission losses, all those factors come in. So that is an issue very important. So one will have to have a trajectory. How will you move in that direction without impacting consumer tariff too much? So penetration of renewable is very welcome. But when we talk about, like recently what central government had done, they have fixed uniform RPO for all the states. That will not work. You will have to work it out, taking into consideration, which is a very detailed exercise, which in a way becomes part of your energy policy. So I think that's what I would say, because so that there will be enough time for others to have their say and question and answer.
Okay, sir. We'll pause there and we'll move to the next speaker. Requesting Radhakrishnan sir to kindly share his views on. Sir, you work with both private and public sectors. You bring both perspectives to the sector as a regulator. As a sitting judge, even for a quasi-judicial body, if you need to balance private and public players, which would you prefer for efficiency, compliance, and consumer interests? Also, do you feel reform is needed in the tariff setting framework over and above the statute amendment? What I mean is moving tariff regulations from cost plus approach to either cost to serve or performance incentive based regulation. And then finally, how are consumer rights and privileges protected today? Do you feel the proposed amendment can include some parts to enhance consumer rights and privileges? If so, then what could those changes be? So your questions are about, public versus private, then the tariff setting framework, cost to serve, performance/incentive based versus cost plus, of course, and then consumer rights. So please, if you can, over to you.
See, as far as the Electricity Act 2003 is concerned, I must say it has given privileges to consumers. Right prior to 2003, any tariff determination was in the government hands, but now you go in under a very transparent mechanism. What are your losses? What are your profits? How you are bringing money? How you are putting up losses? How do you propose to go ahead? All these things are now, all these things are consumer oriented. As far as consumer education is concerned, yes, Electricity Act has given enough privilege, because today also you see in this seminar, in COVID thing, not less than 500, 600 people are participating in this, and because of the market determination. Had it been a 5 years, 10 years back, you would have hardly got 50 or 100 people across it. That is the way the consumer is getting educated. As far as energy conservation is concerned, energy economics is concerned, and many other aspects. Second thing, you did ask about the private and public participation. I worked in both the sectors, and basically I was one of the best electricity board of the country during my time. I worked in a private organization which is now treated one of the best private organization in the country. And as myself also, I worked in entrepreneurship. I was advising to a number of private companies all across the country, but I am finding all jobs are alike. The grass is always greener in the other side. But the thing which I am personally feeling, like everybody has got his own responsibility. When we invited, if you remember, 2003 was the instrumental in inviting the private. It was 92 licensing and other things are there. After 2003 Electricity Act, you started inviting private participation. So also, out of 4,50,000, 4,60,000 are total capacity, a large number of private participation is there. But they are in bad shape. They are in bad shape. Why they are in a bad shape? Because of certain reasons which everybody knows. That DISCOMs are not able to recover the amount, and they are also putting high loss. All those things are there. I would like to leave to the audience to get it. But private sector has really brought a sea change in this country. Your consumption per capita consumption prior to privatization in this country was around 500 units, whereas right now it's 1100 units with a double of the population size. So all those things have really played a big role in this. Third thing, what you was asking about tariff determination and all, I must say that Electricity Act 2003 brought the power by market, power by choice. That was the concept of the Electricity Act 2003. And if you go for the electricity bill 2001 and 2002, that time it was envisaged by 2010. Even a retail consumers will have a choice of a power from where he wants to buy. We had got a successful advantage of being compared with the telecom sector during that time. People have gone in a big way from the public sector to private sector, and people were shifting overnight to the private sector, the telecom sector. So those are the things. But as far as the tariff determination is concerned, I must say in bringing power by market. As of date, 4, 5, 6% power which is being sold through power trading. There are 50, 60 private traders and 2 exchanges were there. I was also involved in setting up the first exchange in the country. So I know it even if 5, 6% power trade is not going to the consumer end, it is going from one state to another state. And basically, all thanks to Dr. Pramod Deo, who is sitting with us, the things have started moving out. Because in the solar, in a power markets and all things, Dr. Pramod Deo's contribution cannot be ignored. The thing which I would like to add up further, like the electricity sector has got no leadership except right now Pramod Deo. Earlier, Tata Rao was there. Thereafter, T.L. Shankar is again an IAS officer was there. Now Pramod Deo was leading, and one Mr. R.V. Shahi is also there right now. He is also in the, if I'm not mistaken, he is also in the this thing. So we should create a leadership this thing so that the consumer at the end of the day should get a lesser. When there was a COVID crisis, I initiated the action of taking the first. I said that no power will be connected to any consumer if he fails to make the payment in the Tripura. That was the order issued in the first week of the April, when we were citing it. The people may not be able to pay the bills daily earners, and it was widely appreciated all across the country. I personally feel most of the states have also adopted the lines on the similar line. Now, I think today Madhya Pradesh also meeting to waive off their penalty charges. The consumer is failing to meet that thing. So consumer education is there, tariff power by markets are there. You have got a lesser rates of the power right now. In the even in a residential and domestic category of the consumer all across the country, in last year tariff was lower than before last year. Basically, one of the government was formed very recently, but most of the country, at the most of the points, country is now trying to lower down their tariff. How they are doing it is the second issue. I also propose, Dr. Pramod Deo may be agreeing on that. I also propose that there should be a uniformity in the certain class of the consumer all across the country. If Bombay consumer is paying 12 rupees and Chandigarh consumer is paying 4 rupees, or Delhi consumer is 5 rupees, it should be at least for certain category, it should be all across the same. One price should be there, that a uniformity of agriculture and residential consumer. I prepared a paper. I submitted a presentation in forum of regulator meeting, and I think Parliament is also working on those lines, at least on the study paper. I also only said at least study before dismissing it, discuss and then dismiss it. But then dismiss it cannot be done, because it has been done in most of the commodities, and it can be. I think it can be done in the election. At least the urban and rural areas, semi-urban areas, all those segments we can really cover up. So I think, thank you, you have called me up for this discussion, although I'm not supposed to really speak, but I tried to speak my heart, and it was my pleasure to be with Dr. Pramod Deo, whom I have always admired. Because of his action, I was in Bombay, I saw his actions in open access, I saw his action in RPOs, in solar, and or even wind power and all those things. The way he has gone, even just to add Himanshu, he wrote he submitted one paper of renewable energy law, which was to be formed, and he submitted that paper to Parliament. I don't know what happened thereafter, but he took the initiation in number of things. So that's why I readily agreed when my name was proposed, Dr. Pramod Deo. And thank you. Thank
you, sir. So now would like to request Mr. Ashok Pense to kindly state his view on. Sir, do you feel the DBT mechanism will be able to bring in the needed distribution reform, and will it, in terms of tariff recovery, significantly improve DISCOM's financial stability? Also, do you feel that there is a need to work out the DBT framework, especially designed for electricity sector? Would if you think so, then what would be the key features of the same? Does the proposed amendment in the statute is it paving a clear path for the DBT-based subsidy allocation and disbursement? And finally, given your years of consumer rights work, your views on are the consumer rights protected today? And when I say consumers, I mean both the retail consumers, citizens, and residential and agricultural consumers, as well as commercial and industrial. So,
Yeah.
so on the DBT mechanism and on the consumer rights, please.
Yeah.
Over to
Yeah. Let's start with DBT mechanism. To begin with, when it appeared at that moment of time, we felt that the DBT would be something like a gas subsidy, where an individual is getting some money put into his account via state, bank account details. Now, Ghanshyam Das Prasad ji last week in one of the webinars said that no, it is not like that, but it will be an account with the distribution company in which the amount will be credited. So this is the first difference which came between what was drafted and which has been this one was given. Now the first question arises: are the DISCOMs in distress, financial distress, because of the amount of subsidy being not given by the state government to the distribution company, and that's why we are trying to bring in DBT? This is the first question that is it the primary reason? Is it the only reason? Now let's look at 5 different states. Let's look at Maharashtra. See, the amount of subsidy which is being given with respect to annual revenue requirement is in the range of 7 to 8%. Let's go to Gujarat. It is around 12%. Let's look at Haryana. It is about 22%. Let's look at Punjab. It is about 25-26%. Lastly, Bihar. I have given only 5-6 states. I have not given through the whole of it. And let's go to Bihar. It is 33%. Obviously, can you compare 33% of the ARR is coming via subsidy with respect to the Maharashtra? The answer is simply no. The reason is very simple. Majority of it is coming from them. Now let's look at even Punjab case. Now in case of Punjab, whatever government has been promising, is it not being given every year? It is being given. The question is, if they are giving, if they have said that we will give you 100, it is almost 10-15 percentage point less, 80-85% is being given, and that has accumulated to a large value. So this is the first part of it. If you look at Maharashtra, every month electricity duty and cess which is being collected is given to the DISCOM. So virtually every month they are getting the subsidy. Then the crux comes is, if that even in Maharashtra, where the percentage with respect to the ARR is low, then why such a scene is the crux. Now I heard from one of the states, I mean, I think Bihar, I'm not so sure, because they are saying that we will have 2 types of tariffs, one with subsidy, without subsidy. Now the question is, if in a month the government has given the subsidy, then it will be subsidized tariff. If it is not given, it is without the subsidy. The way in which Sensex goes up and down, can we have that sort of a policy for a consumer for 12 months? Will it come? Will it not come? We don't know. Let's look at Maharashtra. How did it happen because Dr. Dev, I have been working with Dr. Dev for a very long time. He was there for the first part, and the second part he had moved to CRC. I'm giving that from 2004 to 2011, 12 or so, a scenario of about 7-8 years. Initially, the tariff for the agriculture was 55 paisa. Then elections came. The moment elections came, at that moment of time, government said it is free electricity. Then in 2 years' time, they realized that so much of subsidy they cannot bring. So they brought in a new thing where a tariff was given, which is 50 paisa. Unfortunately, at that moment of time, there was no clarity from the government how much subsidy they are giving. So what did happen is, in 3 months' time, when the first bill came, all the agricultural consumers were up in the arms, because it was 50 paisa plus FAC of 1 rupee 50 paisa. So that means the government was saying it is 50 paisa, 1 rupee of 50 paisa of FAC made their tariff as 2 rupees. There was a huge uproar. After the uproar was there, for almost for 1.5 years, government was deterring, and in the whole process, they did not make up their mind whether they should give FAC money, this, that, etc., because the money had to come from the government. Ultimately, at the end, or 1.5 years, they said no, okay, FAC we will give. Then came the fourth stage. In the fourth stage, no, now FSC you will have to give. At that moment of time, MERC came out with a new regulation where FSC used to be equal. That means if it is 1 rupee 50 paisa, all everybody is 1 rupee 50 paisa. Then we brought FSC, which is proportional. That means it could be for industry namesake. I'm saying for 1 rupee 50 paisa, it could be 2 rupees for him, and for agriculture, it could be 50 paisa. So it brought down. So that means we started with 55 paisa, no, then 55 paisa with FSC, no FSC. Then came a scene that proportional FSC. This occurred over a period of 7 years. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, etc. What was the impact? For all those virtually 7 years, the agriculturists did not pay the bills at all. So where do we go? So can we have it if it has occurred a period of 7-8 years? This flip of the policy creates such a problem. Can it? What you can imagine what sort of thing will happen on a monthly basis? It is just not possible. This is the first part. Now let me go to the second part. This is I'm talking about the government's roles as far as the subsidy is concerned. Now let's go to the second role which regulatory commissions play. Let's look at Tamil Nadu. 7 years there is no tariff increase. Then let's go to, let's say, Delhi for some time now. Just now that the total regulatory assets have come down, the regulatory asset at one moment of time were 14,000 crores, roughly equal to the ARR of all the three. That means if you had to liquidate the entire regulatory asset, you will have to double the tariff. Is it possible? The answer is no. Let's look at even now, they have come to 8,000 crores. So one, on occasions, because of the political pressures, regulatory commissions have not been giving tariff increase. One, they have created a regulatory assets which are unmanageable. Third, on occasion, some of the decisions are you can see blatantly wrong, and once they go to APTEL and maybe Supreme Court, they come back and hit the consumers like a bullet and creates a solid problem, and then it becomes into regulatory asset. Because at any given year, this is my gut feel, not beyond 10 to 12 percentage point. You can't have a 25-30% increase in the tariff because there is a big uproar. Political bosses come into the picture and creates a problem. So even the regulators have to act not under political pressure, but use their own judgment. Lastly, I'm coming to the consumers. Now, as Dr. Pramod Dev already said, I'm not once again going into that. For your information, because of the agriculturists have not paid their, they have not paid their arrears this year for the 2019, 2020, which our tariff order has recently come. For your information, almost 68 or 69% of our ARR is in arrears, and that will go right up to 75 and 78% over a period of time. Now, if the agriculture, I do not want to repeat the figures, Dr. Dev has very elaborated that figure. So this is one sector. Now let me go to the second sector, residential consumers. We have got a pocket like, let's say, Ratnagiri. Where from our famous Alfonso mango comes. Their collection efficiency is 99%. But we have some cities where the collection efficiency is as low as 72%. In same Maharashtra, a set of consumers are absolutely bound to pay the money, and there are set of consumers, come what may. If the electricity bill comes, I'll make an arrow and throw it off. Now that behavior also needs to be changed. That set of residential consumer also need to be told. Let's go to the third sector. Third sector where we are having a problem is right from the corporations of municipal corporations right up to the Gram Panchayat level, where typically they are taking the electricity for water, and the second part of it is street lights. Let's take a specific case because I have picked up the figures just yesterday. We have got one city in Maharashtra called as Aurangabad. You might be knowing Ellora Ajanta, that the famous caves are in the Aurangabad. Now, Aurangabad gets water from Jayakwadi, which is 53 kilometers. It is pumped on a hillock, and just for information, the level of Jayakwadi to the hillock top level is about half 500 meters of a half a kilometer. What I'm trying to give you is this: more the distance, more the pumping height, then obviously you require more horsepower, obviously you require more electricity. Now per month, the electricity bill for water is 4 crores. The by sale of water by Aurangabad Municipal Corporation, I have not taken into account anything like, the sale of the value of water, the cost of water, the operation maintenance, administrative cost, manpower cost, nothing. They total billing is 3 crores. So you can imagine 4 crore is the electricity bill, sale of water is 3 crores, 1 crore is deficit. There today outstanding is 40 crores, which is equal to 10 months. Do we have the capacity to disconnect Aurangabad for not payment of electricity? So public water works and street lights are the people who are not paying. Some policy has to be brought in. Somebody has to come to subsidize that, and that's the end of it. Last and least, obviously, the government, different government organizations, like maybe a civil hospital, maybe a collector's office, maybe a police commissioner's office, or maybe a ZP's office, they are not going. So all put together, agriculture is consumer. The second set of people is the residential consumer. Public water works, and in addition to that, the street lights, and last but least, government. So all of them to Maharashtra, to Mahadiscom, they do not pay almost 12 to 14% of their money required, which is nothing but if between 65% to 78% of your ARR goes to power, and if you don't get 15%, you can imagine who are the people who are going to be hit. Either it is a thermal generator, all renewable energy, what you people are talking about. So the crux of the issue is, as far as the subsidy is concerned, it is one of the elements. So that needs to be streamlined. 2, regulatory commissions will have to come out of the political bosses. And the last and least, the consumers even will have to be told that there is nothing like a free lunch, and if you don't pay, we will disconnect. We will disconnect is saying is easy. Let's look at Maharashtra. We have got 44 lakh agricultural consumers. We really, even after telling them if they don't pay, we do not have guts to disconnect. At the end of it is, if you do not make any change in all these 3 parameters, which I have 3 parameters on change is required, and if it doesn't come, then all the time talking about the whether renewable energy or thermal energy not getting paid is going to be an years together issue. I have seen it for 20 years. I do not know for how long it will continue, but I am sure in the years to come, these 3 sectors will improve and there will be a change. Thank you so much. Take over.
Thank you, sir. That's really
yeah.
Thank you, sir. This is really much appreciated, and it's a perspective that people often don't get to see, that they don't get to hear. The fact that we ourselves, as consumers, in our various capacities, as individuals and as government officers and so forth, we often miss this point that our not paying actually causes the discounts to be and so forth. But so we have heard these 2 different views, to somewhat related. Dr. Dev mentioned also that the political economy is something that cannot be taken out of it, and that agricultural customers and others need to be taken care of. And you mentioned it in a different way that consumers need to pay, and the non-payment is actually the first thing that's creating issues, and that it has to, that we have to find a solution to it, and that includes public entities and government entities also. And so it's a case of consumer fix yourself type of thing. But I'm sure some of the other speakers will have something to say about it. Let's hear from Rahul at this point. So Rahul, the Honorable Supreme Court has suggested restricting, or you could say banned almost, the usage of DG sets. So considering the largely theoretical 24/7 electricity supply to industry in many states, energy storage has become sort of a need of hour, especially for commercial and industrial power consumers, but maybe also to some extent in certain areas, the residential consumers. Do you think the regulatory framework in India is ready to facilitate storage at all 3 levels, actually, behind the meter, transmission and distribution, and generations? So that's the first question to you. Also, energy storage hasn't found any mention in the proposed amendment or the even the concept of prosumer or demand response has not found a mention in the current draft, as most of the ESS would be of that nature. What suggestions would you have for the amendment? And then finally, how do you view the energy storage and solar as options for powering e-mobility and EV charging infra going forward? And how does it connect to the grid? So a lot of questions for you there, but given that you bring such a rich and global experience set to this, love to hear from you, please.
Thank you very much, Ashok. Firstly, in terms of the diesel generator sets and some of the restrictions which are either imposed in places like Delhi or expected to get widely set up, definitely energy storage is a very much viable option. And one thing which number of times actually India, on a consumer side, there is a huge penetration of energy storage already. According to India Energy Storage Alliance estimates, each year somewhere around 20 to 24 gigawatt hour worth of batteries get sold for inverter and UPS applications. We believe there is a total amount of UPS or inverter based energy storage already available in the grid on the consumer side is more than 50 gigawatt hour. So there is a great opportunity. There are numbers of DG sets are somewhere around 90 to 100 gigawatt. But what we believe is out of these, maybe around top 5% is a low hanging fruit. So maybe around 5 gigawatt hour of energy storage deployment can happen, where just purely on basis of the saving on diesel usage. So you may not have to eliminate the diesel generator. You can still keep it in case of emergency of any distribution outage, which is going to last multiple days. But you can actually cut down the diesel usage from more than 500 or in some cases even 800 or 1000 hours per year down to less than 100 hours in a year. And that itself can be economically viable. Unfortunately, in India, we are just used to talking about it and not following up on action. There are lost opportunities in places like Andaman Nicobar, where for last 6 years we are talking about adding solar plus storage and replacing that with replacing the diesel generators, where we are sending diesel 1200 kilometers on a diesel fired boats and then selling it at the same price at which it is sold in Chennai or Calcutta. And still the average cost of electricity in Andaman Nicobar or places like that is more than 28 rupees per kilowatt hour. And solar plus storage has now come down below 10 rupees. So these are kind of a lost opportunities where there is just too much discussion in the policy circle. And because of lots of wasted interest, we are not implementing. So we think this is a no-brainer. And now just on a commercial industrial customer side, we should see a big uptake on this if the financing for energy storage projects can be arranged. Now, coming to the regulatory framework, we do believe that energy storage plays a role in all three segments. So right from the generation level, transmission, distribution, as well as on the consumer side. And energy storage needs to be defined appropriately in the Electricity Act. In fact, CERC had issued in 2017-18 a staff paper where they had raised these questions. And after that, there were a lot of deliberation which had happened where the CERC has received all these inputs. So I'm really disappointed that these factors are not considered in the Electricity Act amendment. There is enough time and there is enough understanding in the CERC staff on the issues which are there. And in last 6-7 years, because some of these discussions actually started when Dr. Pramod Dev was chairman in terms of looking at ancillary services and if energy storage can play a role in providing ancillary services to the grid. Unfortunately, although during Dr. Pramod Dev's times, there was a lot of work happened, and in fact, there was a roadmap laid out for operationalization of ancillary services, where from June 2017, we were supposed to start procuring all ancillary services, including frequency regulation. We have actually ended up wasting time in just trying to do studies on looking at can coal power plants be added controls to do frequency regulation, can hydropower be used for doing frequency regulation, whereas actually around the globe both coal and hydro have been providing these services for more than a century. So there is no technical question, no technical study required, but we have spent last 3 years in doing 2 pilot studies at 1 coal plant and 5 or 6 hydro plants to conclude that both resources can do spinning reserves or synchronous reserve services. But these studies have not even touched on frequency regulation, which is a need for improving power quality on the grid. Now, in that regard, I feel that the Electricity Act amendment should also have focus on power quality as one of the measures, because we are now moved away from the supply demand shortfalls. Now we have, in terms of just the installed capacity level, almost more than double the capacity as compared to the peak demand expected on the grid. But at the same time, as you said rightly, the 24/7 power availability, and that too at the right power quality in terms of the voltage level or harmonics, is nowhere there. And that's where we are in this situation where customers who are able to pay and who need to pay for a better power quality are paying way more than what the tariffs are defining, because they have to create a entire parallel infrastructure for addressing these issues on their side. At the same time, there is no mechanism where actually a distribution company can invest in upgrading the infrastructure for such customers and actually create this infrastructure. We had given number of times CERC calculations and showing that if they actually start procuring ancillary services at a system-wide level, and even if they assign all the costs only to C&I customers, the incremental cost increases for C&I customers would be less than 1 or 2% of their electricity bill. And if we can really stabilize grid, where grid frequency even right now fluctuates between 49.65 hertz to 50.35 hertz, which is almost unheard anywhere in a developed country. But in India, the regulators somehow just feel that this is a luxury and we will solve this problem at the end. Whereas we just need to allocate around maybe 2 gigawatt worth of resources, and some of that can come from existing thermal plants or hydro plants, but also allow newer technologies like demand response and energy storage to play a role in it. We can actually become a leader in adopting these technologies, and in less than 1 year, we can actually substantially improve the grid power quality. Unfortunately, that vision is lacking from the regulators, and as IESA, we are right now once again creating a detailed recommendations to CERC on that. But ultimately, I think industry has to step up and put in pressure on these regulators. And to some extent, now actually we are shifting our hope to now state level, because over last 6-7 years, probably the central regulators have lost the opportunity where they could have taken credit for kickstarting a big industry in India and making India a global leader in this area. Now the commercial price points are reaching to a level where sort of a rooftop solar plus storage kind of opportunities, these can be now determined at a state level. And we have seen this around the world, like places like California or New York or Hawaii, where state regulators have taken leadership. These are the centers which have become global hubs for deployment of advanced energy storage, and these are the states who are attracting lots of investment in those states for associated infrastructure as well as startup ecosystem. So we are hoping similarly in India, there should be 3 or 4 states at least where the state regulators will be proactive enough, where after seeing this happening around the world for last years, they can be brave. Coming to your last question, in terms of solar plus storage and EV charging, we have little bit mixed views on that. Definitely there are opportunities like for some of the public charging infrastructure where maybe the distribution system is weak. You can definitely go for solar plus storage as a charging infrastructure. You may look at such infrastructure along with telecom towers across the national highway infrastructure to try to create certain hubs for allowing public charging across highways so that EV adoption is not limited only to cities. At the same time, I think there are ways in which EV adoption needs to be increased just by grid-connected charging infrastructure. And in fact, that is something which can really save distribution companies, because most of the distribution companies are facing challenge where They have signed up huge contracts for their baseload procurement, and actually during number of hours during the day, they just don't have sufficient load. So by doing actually smart tariff structures and encouraging charging during those times, the electric vehicle loads can actually help distribution companies in optimizing their existing distribution infrastructure. But if they don't do it, then actually the EV charging infrastructure and associated peak loads, if that starts happening during the evening peaks or morning peaks, then that could create huge pain points for the grid. So either with solar and storage or without this, definitely there needs to be a very smart approach to building the EV charging infrastructure. And where there is a need, where maybe you need to upgrade the distribution infrastructure or other, even just storage on its own could be integrated. But given that now solar is becoming the cheapest energy source, obviously once you build such infrastructure, solar plus storage can also make sense. I hope.
No, this is fantastic. Thank you. Again, this is a perspective which is important to highlight, Rahul, because it is a fact that we are moving beyond simply supply-demand balance, and we have to care about quality of power and round-the-clock availability of power. And this is something specifically that a large chunk of clients need, and in many cases are willing to pay for, and with not a whole lot of additional expense. This can be created, and storage can play a huge part in it. So and absolutely the EV charging part, especially the base load part of it, the fact that nighttime can be used for charging storage, it actually helps DISCOMs. It can help DISCOMs tremendously all over the country as the whole migration from the fleet from liquid fuels to electricity happens over the next 5-10 years. So thank you for the perspective. Now moving on, then coming to you, Abhishek. So Abhishek, as a legal professional with years of power sector experience, if you have to rate the reforms starting from Electricity Act 2003 to the large and hairy reform goal that goal emphasized by many of carriage content separation, how will you rate this amendment which is on the table? Is it a significant move to prepare for the next level, or is it just a correctional amendment to make Electricity Act 2003 more effective? So that's one question about the Act itself. Then, do you feel that if the proposed amendment is implemented, whatever shape today, can it reduce the regulatory uncertainty, the regulatory inconsistencies, and make power sector more lucrative from investment perspective? What's the potential on the what is the potential impact on the legal profession, right? And then if you have one or two major points that need reconsideration from a legal perspective to make the amendment more acceptable or more solid footing, please, what would those be? So one is about the the kind of legislation that it is. Is it really moving the ball forward on reform? Second is, can it reduce regulatory uncertainty, and what's the impact on legal profession? Third is, what would be some changes that you would recommend? Over to you.
So thanks, Adarsh. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. So I think I'll take the last two first in terms of what has this bill done to reduce regulatory or legal uncertainty for contracts for the power sector, and what it could have done. And I think as a legacy, we have to appreciate that there are things that a legislation can do, and there are things that it can enable and let the regulators and other stakeholders take it forward. So I think we have to recognize that there are inherent challenges when a legislation like an Electricity Act or Electricity Amendment Act is made, because its purpose is to enable the stakeholders. And in this case, its purpose is to enable the government, its purpose is to enable the regulatory commissions, etc., to take the necessary steps forward. So I think that is the constraint that we have to bear in mind when we are assessing legislation and its ability to carry out change. And the 2003 Act tremendously modified the landscape for electricity regulation in India, and there are no two doubts about that. Now, coming at what this legislation in particular is doing, I mean, to reduce or remove the regulatory uncertainty, one of the game changers, quote unquote, that are thought to be introduced is this whole concept of a separate regulating authority for contract enforcement, and I will take that up first because that's something that that's been talked about a lot, and it's been projected also as something which is going to change the landscape in a very significant manner. So, in terms of how is this a positive move? I mean, I don't agree with the authority, but still, I see at least one positive in this move, and the positive is that fundamentally the regulator acting as an adjudicator of disputes, there is a conflict there. A regulator that is making the regulations should not be the one interpreting the regulations. That's the classic principle of separation of powers that we see in when we talk about judiciary and executive differentiation, legislative differentiation. So in that sense, it is a positive move insofar as it is trying to segregate the regulatory functions of the regulator from the adjudicatory functions, which are sought to be transferred into a separate body. And I think what remains with the regulatory commission after this, and if this amendment is passed, is going to be actually mostly regulatory issues, because even tariff disputes which remain with the regulators are also, in my view, in the domain of a regulatory exercise of power only, because they are not really, adjudicating disputes in that sense, because they are actually deciding tariffs and, clarifying on those, glitches which may have remained there. So that's one positive. But the problem that you have with a regulatory authority like this is that we are sort of assuming that what the regulatory commissions, or 29 of them, could not do in last so many years, another body, the 30th one, will be able to do it more efficiently. And that's where the fundamental assumption is wrong. I mean, and there are various reasons that are given for why the regulatory commissions have not succeeded as much as they should have as far as dispute resolution was concerned. Is there were vacancies. I mean, there are people who say that regulatory commissions have been vacant. The vacancies are not filled in time. There are issues with respect to whether they are neutral enough when they are adjudicating disputes, etc. At least the perception is that the regulatory commissions are not as neutral as they should be when they are deciding disputes. The issue really is that can another body which we are creating, will it be able to address these issues or not? Because vacancy is an issue which can plague even a centrally constituted body as much as it can plague a state constituted body, and there are ample number of commissions and bodies where vacancies remain for months on end. So there is no guarantee that a centralized body is going to be more efficient and more manned than a state body. Similarly, the whole issue of the fact that a centrally constituted body is going to be more neutral and is going to decide disputes more dispassionately has its own challenges, because here is a commission or here is a body that will not have the representation of the state governments, which are an important stakeholder in the dispute, because most of the disputes will be between DISCOMs and GENCOs or TRANSCOs and DISCOMs, etc. And in those cases, the state DISCOMs may feel rightly or wrongly that they are being treated unfairly by a centrally constituted body, and particularly the problem could be more acute when the political dispensation in power in the center and the states are different. So is this commission really the game changer to that extent? I mean, if you look at the Electricity Act itself empowered the commissions to create enable arbitrations of disputes. It's a different matter that the commissions have not availed of that power that's been given to them and have not referred matters to arbitration as they should have, and have tried to assume that power to themselves. And I think that's where the queue lies, because in every infrastructure sector, you see arbitrations are being promoted very, very aggressively. And the Arbitration Act, as it stands in India, at least post its amendment since 2015, is becoming more and more robust and efficient. So one of the ways the problem could have been more efficiently addressed is to make institutional arbitration mandatory for disputes between various players instead of creating one more authority. The institutional arbitration, it helps the state discoms also in a way that they have a say in appointing the arbitrator. So they cannot tomorrow go back and say that they have been shortchanged by a body where they didn't have a representative, hearing them. So I think that could have been a more efficient solution rather than creating a whole new authority and expecting it to solve the problems of various stakeholders. So I think that's the point on what this bill has done and what it could have done in the alternative. Now, the second question that you have raised is whether carriage content separation is something that that this bill really provides a game changer impetus to that or push to that. The point is that carriage content separation at the end of the day is something that needs more than a legislation to push through. I mean, it needs political will, it needs political consensus to be pushed through. So assuming and hoping that a legislation is going to drive that change is something that is expecting too much of a legislation, because the legislation has had two provisions, and the classic example that comes to my mind is the open access and cross subsidy, which were supposed to have been there. I mean, the cross subsidy removal or reduction and open access was supposed to be the default positions in the 2003 Act, and yet in 2020 we are sitting till today discussing the issue whether open access and cross subsidy should be there or not there. So it's an issue more of a political will and the how the political economy plays that role rather than pushing it through legislation. One issue that I think I would just take up, and I think Mr. Pense has already discussed this issue quite extensively, about this whole role of consumer protection within the bill, within the Electricity Act, and whether something could have been done for that under the Electricity Amendment Bill. I mean, by and large, Electricity Act provides a reasonably decent framework for consumer participation. It leaves a lot of discretion, or rather, it leaves a large scope and role for the state level authorities, including the state commissions and state advisory committees, to take up that role more aggressively than they have actually indeed taken in the last 20 years, or rather last 17 years. But one way where the bill could have addressed the issue is one of the issues that is faced by consumers is this whole issue of approaching the ombudsman, approaching the state grievance redressal authorities, and getting to get the orders or directions issued by these bodies, getting them enforced from DISCOMs. One of the problems that one could face is that, despite the fact, the ombudsman and grievance redressal authorities, they themselves have constricted their powers quite significantly for unknown reasons. But one way in which they could have improved or given more strength to these bodies is by giving them enforcement powers. Because at the moment, what happens is you may have an ombudsman passing a direction, but that direction is not really enforced. I mean, they don't have enforcement powers. So I mean, what this legislation could have done is to give those bodies the powers to enforce their directions, or at least give these SERCs the power to enforce the directions so that there is at least some sanctity to the orders that are passed by these two agencies. So yeah, I think that's where I would stop, and I think I would let others ask questions if they have.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. That's an interesting perspective that that arbitration could be used as a viable alternative for something like the contract authority. As you can imagine, there are hundreds of questions that we received over the last few days, and there are a lot of questions which are coming now as we speaking. Dr. Dev sir, one question that perhaps is a question for you from Mr. Sangeeta Srivastava is the DBT is already running for many other commodities in country since 2014, and consumers are getting benefited by the subsidy in their bank account. Can it?
I think there is a problem with the sound. We can't hear you properly.
So the question is about DBT. The fact that DBT is already running for many other commodities since 2014, and consumers are getting benefited. So, is it that challenging for electricity is it more challenging for electricity looking into the variability of tariffs and subsidies throughout the states? And is there a roadmap for implementing DBT for different states, and also better understanding? Because if the subsidy information was out there, then maybe DBT would help clarify this information.
See, DBT is a very good idea, and when it is paid directly to the DISCOM, it appears to be the foolproof way of helping DISCOMs. But as I pointed out, take Gujarat and Maharashtra, where you have got separation of agriculture feeders. So if you have 100 pumps on a feeder, and out of that, so let's take 50% of the farmers have paid we are not talking about the subsidy part. Subsidy part is taken care. But the remaining part, which is not paid, what do you do about that? Because as I said, that tariff for Gujarat and Maharashtra is something like fixed at 40 or 50% of the average cost of supply. That part is anyway paid by the state government to bridge the gap between what the regulator has fixed and that. But the remainder part, like 1 rupee 50 paisa has to be paid by the farmer. So now if the 50% of the farmers on that pump feeder have paid and 50% have not paid, how are you going to control? Are you going to cut off the supply to all the 100 farmers on that feeder? So this is a real issue, and in fact that is one of the reasons why DBT is a good idea. It should be paid directly into the DISCOM's account and not into the consumer, because consumer doesn't pay. But still the remainder, if the tariff was zero, if the agriculture supply was free, then it would work. But then that is not desirable. This is one of the problems, and this needs to be addressed when we are talking of this amendment. And a whole idea of why we are having separation of feeders is agriculture metering is a problem. So this takes care, and agriculture load also can be managed. So again we come to this issue that whether agriculture should be given electricity 24/7 is not possible, because in Maharashtra 42 lakh pump sets, if they were to come on stream at the same time, your 23,000 megawatt power system will collapse. So it has to be done by roastering. Because of feeder separation, it is done by roastering. Second, also advantage there is that you find that this way you can manage supply to agriculture. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to do that. And also you would know how much is being supplied to the agriculture, because at least at the feeder level, you should have metering. Of course, recent experience shows that this committee which MERC had appointed and where Prayas took a real initiative, that agriculture consumption was overstated, exaggerated, and then it once it is corrected, the AT&C losses of DISCOM have gone up.
So thank you, sir. Another question that we have actually from Mr. VP Raja is that at the end of the day, everything depends on the quality, character, and integrity of the regulations and respect for the rule of law. So this was something which was highlighted by Mr. Pense as well. Further, a sense of fair play and impartiality should prevail. How to achieve this is a big question. Dr. Dev, sir, if you can take a few more minutes and answer this big question.
You see, after all, you take take judicial system, your regulatory system, you are part of the society. Now, as you know, that the role of the Supreme Court itself is being questioned. So you cannot expect that regulators are going to be something very different creature. After all, they are part of the system. What can be done is increasing the role of the consumers. And for that, I think government needs to have a definite policy to support this organization in terms of funding, training, because if we have to have many organizations that, like Ashok Pense has limited habits, but it can be had somewhere that can play important role. The second is the regulators, whether they are appointed by the center or by the state, it's not going to matter. That is an issue I don't want to really touch because that's not our topic. But you will find that even if they are appointed by the center, they will have to be knowing the local language because the public hearings are very important. So if you are going to have these 4 members, including chairman, at least 3 will have to know the local language. Now, once you are appointing the local language, obviously they will get influenced by the people in the state political dispensation and various media and all other factors. So the consumer has to also act very actively, and that's the way you can get that balance. And once the consumer awareness increases, and when the standard of performance, also the load shedding, because in theory today we say we are surplus, but the reality is that if you go into rural areas, you are not getting 24/7 supply. Quality of power is very poor. In fact, I am sitting here in Alibag, and can you imagine here we have load shedding going. Luckily, internet works, so I don't have to worry about what will happen when I'm participating in a webinar. But I take it for granted that power supply will be switched over to the, either you have a generator or you have a inverter. So that is the situation. So what we have to really ensure to do that. So I think the regulator has to be made accountable, and that can be best done. Today what happens under the law, regulator is accountable to the legislature. That doesn't help because that annual report is placed in the legislature, and legislature is quite okay because if the tariffs are not increased for majority of the legislators who are the farmers, they are not going to complain. What we required is there has to be a peer review kind of regulator. What can be done is that you can have some past regulators who have a good reputation, and they can do the peer review, and you can shame the regulators that the role that has been assigned to you, you have not played that role, and that is the only way, because I think finally you should not be looking at a post-retirement job. If you have been given this, because I think in the given today's social condition, I think that itself is the only way where you are brought into media focus. And if the regulator is not performing the job, he has to be made accountable to the society.
Thank you very much, sir. the next question is, I think there's a question from Anand Singh. He's asking whether the Act needs to relook from the perspective of progressive concepts like smart grid, prosumer, blockchain, because it's all heading towards decentralization. Is that something which can be covered by the Act? Probably this question, Rahul, if you could take on this question and see if you can provide some suggestions.
So I think the electricity sector is definitely going through a major change with the technology revolution. The way the control systems have evolved, the way the internet-enabled controls are now possible, the distributed energy architecture is coming up, and with the concepts like blockchain, where peer-to-peer trading and other concepts can come in. These all will sooner or later get integrated in the electric grid, and I think the Electricity Act definitely needs to consider it. In this regard, actually, one fundamental challenge what we feel is that just the concept of franchisee, and I know that there are some good case studies and some success stories around franchisee model, but based on at least my limited understanding and maybe looking at how some of these things have happened in developed countries, I really feel by limiting this role of private sector on franchisee, we are losing significant opportunities. We have challenges where actually if we can promote licensing model, then not just about improving the collection efficiency, but we can actually explore areas where you can significantly upgrade the distribution networks and address the power quality issues which Dr. Pramod Dev mentioned. And once that starts happening, then actually the licensee entities would have a lot of incentives to try to explore technologies like blockchain or other ways where they can start exploring how to improve the overall grid operation. Just by going for franchising and giving them a certain share for improving collection efficiency is actually I think really short-sighted and is not going to have any major impact in terms of improving the issues for the distribution sector.
Sort of a follow-on question to that, Rahul, though, is the current form of the amendment on the table, is it covering for this sort of somewhat expanded role for sub-licensees?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? I could not hear you clearly.
Okay, so I will go slowly. Basically, it was a follow-on question to your answer, which is that in this current form, does the sub-licensee role, is it well defined enough that somebody could take these new technologies and start deploying it, or is there more definition which is needed?
No, so definitely there is some improvement which is required. Like in the context of energy storage, clearly I mentioned in my opening remarks that maybe energy storage itself needs to be defined in the Electricity Act, because right now energy storage can fall in both as a generation or as a load, or in fact around the world, like in US, the Federal Electricity Regulatory Commission has actually taken steps where energy storage and similar technologies can also be seen as a non-wires alternative for transmission upgrade. So that type of a definition right now is missing in the Electricity Act, and this was something which was already pointed out to CERC during the creation of the staff paper on energy storage, that these things needs to be updated. So we hope that there will be some recognition of that in the final amendment.
Thank you, Rahul. The next question, moving on to the next question, this is from Shreyans Naval at BRPL Delhi. The question is whether the proposed amendment qualifies for the legal test as per constitution, and whether the perspective of arbitration panels is undermined while introducing ECA. I think partly you've already answered that, Abhishek, but Abhishek, if you could answer this question about the proposed amendment qualifying for the legal test as per constitution. We can't hear you. If you can unmute yourself, Abhishek, we could hear you.
My apologies. Yeah. So as far as constitutionality of the ECA is concerned, I think broadly speaking, it will it will pass the constitutionality test, because what has been very carefully done, at least in the composition, is that you have the majority of judicial members. I mean, right now that the contemplation is that there'll be two judicial members plus one chairperson who's going to be retired judge. So in terms of whether it is constitutional or not, I think it passes the constitutionality test. So on that perspective, there shouldn't be a challenge. The question is whether it is desirable or not from a policy perspective is a separate issue.
Actually, the question was about the constitutionality of the amendment as a whole. So actually, not being a legal person, I'm not even sure what the question means. But the question was about the amendment as a whole.
Well, I mean, constitutionality of amendment as a whole, I don't think there's an issue there, because what it's trying to do is actually, what's there already. It's just changing a few things here and there. So, I mean, I don't think constitutionally you can say that the amendment itself is unconstitutional. I mean, that will be stretching it too far.
No,
Yes.
what was I saying about constitutionality? I think question has what he has here in mind is that the center-state relation. That is the issue, because after all, it is a concurrent subject, and when you are going to have regulator selected by a central committee, and you will have two members coming from different states, so that is the issue, whether it will be really acceptable to the states. So it's not so much of a constitutionality, it is the political matter, such an amendment, whether it will be acceptable to the states and whether in the Rajya Sabha, whether it will be passed. See, that is the real issue which comes. But as I have also pointed out, that in any case, when you have these regulators appointed by that committee, one should not forget that they must be speaking the language of the state where they will be working. At least 3 members out of 4. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for that regulatory commission to operate. So that itself means you are going to look for people from that state. If you don't do that, that will be. And incidentally, one of the issues has come. If this appointment is to be done by 2 representatives, what will happen? When will the term of West Bengal come? That is not an issue. If you want, you can start with taking these 2 members, one from West Bengal and another from Tripura, to start with, and the roster can move. So that is not a problem that can be taken care politically. That's what I thought I would just add. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I think this. I just want to. I think Mr. Dev has raised a very important point, and this is an issue that obviously it was not part of this session, so I obviously didn't express my views. And while it's constitutional, and but I do have, ideologically, one could argue whether the selection process, which is centrally driven, is actually desirable or not. And Mr. Dev has very rightly pointed out the concerns that may be there. One more issue, and I think that's perhaps with the 2 retired bureaucrats who are on the panel, they can address that issue very more effectively, is that a body which is the selection committee for all the regulatory commissions plus the ECA is actually a 5-member committee, of which 4 are serving secretaries of the government. Now, a body like that, which is going to do selections for over 100 people, is that an efficient or an effective body to carry out that process or not? That's a question that one should try to answer, because with 30 odd commissions and ECAs to be appointed, we are looking at about 150 odd appointments, and whether a body like that, which is consisting of serving secretaries who have other work to do, will they be effectively positioned to carry out the appointments?
Thanks. That's a good question, and it's something to think about, Abhishek. One question is about the and maybe this question is for Mr. Pense. That it's come from Mr. Ramesh Kumar Gupta at Power Generating Company. He is asking if the government as an enabler facilitator brings the policies for betterment of the sector to move from the status quo. So he's asking a very provocative question that we as an engineer working professional in this field, if the government proposals are wrong, then what should be the policies, or what should be our policy? I guess is what he's asking. Mr. Pense, you
Yeah.
have thoughts?
Yeah. See, the whole question continuously will come into the picture is ultimately whether it is a thermal generator, whether it is a renewable generator, whether it is NTPC, whether it is IPP, whosoever it is. Ultimately, the buyer is a DISCOM. And even if we talk about namesake, I'm saying, sanctity of contracts, RPO obligations, then we must have LC, we must have payment security mechanism, everything accepted. Is really the DISCOM capable of paying money to the generators at all? Because right from about 64-65% to the 78% of their ARR belongs to one single item, and that is power purchase. Now, if you have a shortfall of 10, 15, 20% in ARR, there is no money, because NTPC gets their money because of the sovereign guarantee. They cannot run away from their bankers. They cannot run away from their employees. So what ultimately left is, year after year, the hit is to only one set of people, and that is generators. And unless and until we move away from, as I said in the earlier part, all the three segments: one, subsidy part of it; two, regulators giving the orders, not creating what should I say, the regulatory asset unnecessarily. Then on occasions there could be decisions which get reversed at this one. And lastly, the consumers who must go into the habit of paying for what they are getting electricity. So unless and until all these three players come together and make DISCOM economically viable, it is a very difficult scene that the generators year after year will keep on getting money. Because as I remember, it was bonds, then Uday, then this scheme, that scheme, etc. Now we have come out with 20,000 crores. Now let's take, for example, even in Maharashtra's case, 20 out of 20,000, how much Maharashtra can get? I mean, out of 90, we will get maybe 5,000. Still, we have got 9,000 crores as ideas of the generator. Still, 4,000 will cross over. And once again, if you look at that, classical situation is, as per that, the state gencos are not supposed to get any out of it. Now, obviously, DISCOM will, if DISCOM, state DISCOM needs to be segregated from the rest of the people, what they are going to do is put everybody on the equal pedestal, and ultimately for the next few months, they'll keep on paying state gencos to survive. The class situation is DISCOM making financially viable because of all these things is the crux of the issue. Generators pushing themselves, whether irrespective of the sector, and saying that all these things must be observed, is a difficult scenario. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Pense. Thank you, Mr. Pense. So with that, we are actually slightly past the time limit that we had set. So with that, we are at the closure of the webinar. Won't be able to take any more questions. So there are dozens and dozens of questions, and very good questions in that. So we are at the closure of the webinar, but let me tell you that this is the closure of the event and not the journey itself. We will continue to be part of the capacity building of our audience in key industry transformation events, as we truly believe in the concept of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, and believe that discussion in a democracy is the bedrock of collective and continuous improvement over time. We will post this webinar as well as earlier webinars, which are already posted partly, to our social media handles, and we would respond to all the queries of audiences who we couldn't respond in limited time after getting feedback from our respective speakers. Once again, thank you for all your time. We honor your attention, and we hope that your return on investment on this hour and a half of your life would be manifold. With all this wisdom that has been shared by our speakers and the experience of all our speakers across the three sessions. Thank you very much, everyone. And let's close.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Adarsh. Thank you.
Thank you.